I'm still enjoying Rustage's Isekai D&D series, but I thought it'd be interesting to discuss what series will replace it when it ends. I'll talk and speculate about ideas that Rustage has mentioned before, and then I'll mention some of my own ideas. So, in one of Rustage's live streams around the time One Piece D&D was ending, Rustage mentioned how One Piece D&D Marines was going to take its place. The topic of Isekai D&D ending and what its replacement would be was then brought up, and Rustage then mentioned how he didn't really want to do any D&Ds based on specific series outside of One Piece. He basically said that future D&D series would likely be themed around anime genres instead of specific anime. He then talked with chat for a while and mentioned the possibility of doing superhero D&D or Shonen D&D after Isekai D&D ends. He didn't get into too many details, so I'm just going to go wild thinking and rambling about what these could be like. It's possible they elaborate on this in like a different live stream that I didn't see, but I don't think it has anything set in stone, so my speculations should still hopefully all make sense and be valid. So starting with superhero D&D. So for superhero D&D, I'm wondering what the setting would be like. I feel like it kinda has to be at least relatively modern. If it's medieval, then it probably wouldn't feel much like they're superheroes, it'd just feel like typical D&D. So time-wise, my guess would probably be mid-1900s at the absolute earliest, but I really think modern day or future would make the most sense. Having it take place in the past would be a lot harder to run, since then you probably have to do a fair amount of research. Of course, it'd likely be an alternate history, but if it's set in the past, then there should probably be a reason for that. And if it's too far of a departure, then it being in the past wouldn't really matter. Although I guess if Rustage didn't want the players to have access to like modern technology like smartphones and stuff, then I could maybe see him doing that. I could see that being overpowered in certain instances, so maybe. But I'm still leaning towards modern day or future for the time period. Location wise, I feel like it kinda has to take place in a city. Assuming it's based on our world, then probably New York, or at least an equivalent, since I'm imagining he'd want to keep it at least kinda similar to most typical superhero stories. I could see Rustage making up a new city just so it doesn't have to worry about geography stuff as much. And if it's an original city, then he would probably have a lot more freedom with world building. Modern day or future New York would have expectations associated with it, but if it's an original city and world, then he could kinda do whatever he wants without it feeling strange. I feel like he would end up just allowing the players to have cell phones and modern technology, but if that actually was a concern for him, then he could just say that the world is completely different, and despite it being like relatively modern, cell phones in specific don't exist. Also, if the world is completely unique, then years wouldn't really have to matter. He could never specify the year or say that the year is 9, but there's still whatever technology he wants. But realistically, I would expect it to be pretty similar to our world just because most superhero media is like that. He could do something crazy and say that the year is -80 and they're cowboy superheroes that ride bicycles. I don't know. But I think it's a safe bet to say they'll have a pretty similar setting to most superhero stories. I really don't know what Rustage would go with, but my baseless guess is that it'd probably take place around modern day with all their modern technology, with a bit of sci-fi mixed in. Probably somewhat of an alternative Earth, kind of like how Batman has Gotham, which is like New York or New Jersey essentially, but different. Now moving on to powers. For powers, I have a ton of questions. Like, would the powers be common or rare? I'm leaning towards it being rare just because if everyone has superpowers, then that has a high chance of either feeling like they aren't superheroes or feeling too similar to My Hero Academia. But I could see it going either way. Mechanically, I also have several questions. Like, would they be using homebrew, or just use the default class features and spells as the superpowers? If you put any spellcaster from D&D into a setting similar to our world, then that can easily be considered a superhero. And even martial classes could be considered superheroes. You could probably make superheroes like Hawkeye, Black Widow, Captain America, even Batman, using default martial class features. At the very least, most martials would be comparable to peak condition athletes in our world, so I could easily see him just using the standard class features but with slight superhero reflavoring. Plus, if he uses too much homebrew, then it could easily not feel like D&D. After a certain point, it'd probably just make more sense to use a different system, so using standard class features is a safe bet. However, disregard everything I just said, because if they only use D&D features and no homebrew, then for me at least, it likely wouldn't feel as much like they're superheroes. In D&D, I've got used to magic spells and stuff, so it wouldn't quite hit as hard if the powers were purely class features and spells. So personally, I think they should, and likely would, use a similar system to how Rustage handled Double Fruits in One Piece D&D. Basically, take the standard D&D classes and add homebrew powers as an option on top of them. Rustage was able to handle William's Roulette Fruit in One Piece D&D, so I have no doubt he could handle homebrew superpowers without too much issue. If he went with a system that's similar to how he handled Devil Fruits, I'd like to see their homebrew powers improve over time, maybe even exaggerated a bit, kinda like mini awakenings where they unlock new abilities over time. Also, ideally, I wouldn't want any of the players to play characters that are too similar to existing superheroes. Like, I wouldn't want an armor or artificer that's just Iron Man. Anthony is kind of that anyway, we already have that to an extent. I could keep rambling about superhero D&D for hours, but instead I'll ramble about other stuff for minutes. For Shonen D&D, I may be forgetting a few details I've mentioned about it. I believe he and Chad were kind of coming up with these concepts for D&D series on the spot, and I wasn't transcribing everything they were saying, just some of it. I think Rustage joked about how Shonen D&D would just be like D&D, or end up being like Fairy Tale. Later, I believe he said how it could maybe take place in like a magic school where the characters get animal companion familiars, I think. Maybe he mentioned more details that I forgot, but I don't have too much to say about this just because it basically just seems like D&D but with familiars. Maybe do some interesting homebrew stuff with the familiars or lean into the magic school aspect to make something cool. It'd no doubt be its own thing, but I'm imagining it's just Strixhaven essentially. Maybe lean into the shonen tropes to make it more shonen feeling. But really, this would probably just be D&D. D&D is fun though, and it's literally a D&D podcast, so if it goes with more of a traditional campaign, I couldn't blame him for that. That makes sense. I'd still check it out and I'd likely end up loving it. I just don't have as much to talk about with this one. I guess familiars have a lot of potential. Like, would it be a typical animal companion, maybe closer to like a Patronus from Harry Potter, or it could be like a stand from JoJo. Actually, I want that. Give me Wizard School D&D with stands. That seems fun. He isn't ever doing a JoJo D&D, so good opportunity here. Do that. But speaking of JoJo, this video was actually a call-out post this whole time. I have to expose Rustage for this real quick. So in a live stream, he mentioned how he doesn't like JoJo and he thinks part 2 is boring. This is such an insane take. I understand not liking part 1, that's not everyone's cup of tea. I understand thinking like the villain of the week style of part 3 is kind of boring at times. But calling part 2 boring is actually insane. Part 2 is anything but boring. That he is insane. If some of you are hearing about this for the first time and you're no longer interested in supporting Rustage, I understand. But don't be angry at him. Instead, you should feel sad. Sad that he can't enjoy peak fiction. But on a lighter note, before I say my personal ideas for future Rustage D&D campaigns, I'm just gonna get the bingo free space out of the way. Obviously, they could do a continuation of Isekai for the next series. Maybe not necessarily with new characters being Isekai'd, but with people born in the Isekai world coming together as a group to deal with threats, maybe. Maybe Finn is a villain, maybe we get Norman villain arc, maybe just all new villains and characters maybe in a different place in the world. I don't know. Currently, I don't really want a sequel to Isekai. It's very possible that when Isekai ends, I'll change my mind, but right now I'm hoping that the ending of Isekai will satisfy me enough to the point where I don't feel like there needs to be a sequel. Now, moving on to my own ideas. So this idea isn't exactly a genre, but technically you could probably also call this Shonen D&D since Shonen is pretty broad, but this is fairly different from Rustage's idea. My idea is high school D&D. Not to be confused with DxD, that's something completely different. But I'm just imagining like the typical trope of all the characters being in school and then something supernatural happens that they have to deal with. College would also work for this too, but I'm imagining most players would play as students, but maybe one of them is a teacher. Tekken can play a geography teacher that like supervises or helps the students' supernatural club or whatever. But basically the main concept is just that they play as regular students, they have to secretly deal with supernatural stuff while being in school. Think most Persona games, some of Stranger Things, Dandy Phantom I guess, or any other example, something like that. Maybe they fight demons, ghosts, cryptids, yokai, I don't really know. I don't know, all those could be cool. But just some supernatural threat. If they want to play as spellcasters, they could justify it by having the supernatural power be given to them. Maybe a warlock patron type of deal. I don't know. I don't really have many definitive ideas or things I'd absolutely want to see from this theoretical series. I just think the concept is really fun. Actually, one definitive idea. As I said, Tekken can be the geography teacher. Or at the very least, one of them should play a cool teacher that's part of the squad. But yeah, that's the concept. I'd love to watch the series. Now for my last idea. I love the idea of Death Game D&D. Basically, a similar concept to death games like Danganronpa, Your Turn to Die, Squid Game, that type of thing. I'm imagining it being most similar to Your Turn to Die, but still pretty different. Basically, it starts off with a group of people waking up after being kidnapped or something along those lines. They then have to escape while solving mysteries and avoiding death. How I do it is that the party is all put together in a group at like the start, but there's like 19 or so other groups of like 4 to 6 people also trying to survive and escape the place. The groups are mostly separated, but they occasionally interact with each other. Sometimes the different groups would just have to murder each other, sometimes they do like competitive puzzles, sometimes they do cooperative stuff, just so like people can get attached to the NPCs before they die. But yeah, just stuff along those lines. I like the idea of there being like screens that show who's alive and who's dead. So for tension and world building, Rustage could say that like 2 people from Group 5 have died, and Group 7 has been completely eliminated. You know, that kind of thing. If a player character ever died, I imagine they'd play as someone from a different group that then joins the main group for whatever reason, the main party. I think there's an absurd amount of potential with this idea, but it would likely be pretty difficult to run since this type of D&D series would require a lot of planning just so the mystery element feels satisfying. Ideally, at least some of the player character backstories would tie into the death game in an interesting way that's revealed over the course of the campaign. And Restage would have to strike a balance where death feels imminent, but players don't just instantly die by, like, failing a puzzle. I guess you could maintain intensity by killing NPCs or chopping off player character fingers or something. You know, this is kind of messed up now that I think about it. But yeah, I could keep rambling about this, but I just think Death Game D&D would be really cool. I could see it maybe being slightly railroady, and a bit on the shorter side, maybe only like 30 episodes or so. But I still think this idea has an absurd amount of potential, and I love to watch it. It'd be incredible if handled correctly, and I think Rustage would be able to pull it off. My only major concern is that so far Rustage's D&D campaigns have been like primarily silly with some serious elements mixed in, but I feel like this would end up being the opposite, so I'm not sure if other people would be as on board with this concept as I am. But for me, this is very appealing. Well, that's it. I hope you enjoyed my rambling. I have one other video about Rustage's D&D at the moment, so you could watch that. I do have other videos, but they're primarily for my friends, and they probably wouldn't make too much sense to someone unfamiliar with the topic. I don't know how much overlap there is between Rustage D&D fans and fans of a niche Minecraft server. Hopefully I'm the only one with this burden. But anyway, thanks for watching and goodbye.